Hi everyone, happy Sunday. Welcome back. Hope you've had a good week. And for those I haven't seen for a while, I just want to say I miss you and I hope you're well. Anyway, this week we are continuing in the book of 1 Samuel, chapters 16, 17, and 18. We meet the young shepherd boy who will grow up to be King David this week. Very exciting. All right, chapter 16. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve for Saul, whom I have rejected as king of Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem, for I have chosen my king from among his sons." But Samuel replied, "How can I go? Saul will hear of it and kill me." To this the Lord answered, "Take a heifer along and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I myself will tell you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one that I point out to you." Samuel did as the Lord commanded. When he entered Bethlehem, the elders of the city came trembling to meet him and inquired, "Is your visit peaceful, O seer?" He replied, "Yes, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. So cleanse yourselves and join me today for this banquet." He also had Jesse and his sons cleanse themselves and invited them to the sacrifice. As they came, he looked at Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is here before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not judge from his appearance or from his lofty stature, because I have rejected him. Not as a man sees does God see, because man sees the appearance, but the Lord looks into the heart." I want to read that again. "Do not judge from his appearance or from his lofty stature, because I have rejected him. Not as man sees does God see, because man sees the appearance, but the Lord looks into the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and presented him before Samuel, who said, "The Lord has not chosen him." Next, Jesse presented Shammah, but Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." In the same way, Jesse presented 7 sons before Samuel, but Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen any one of these." Then Samuel asked Jesse, Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse replied, "There is still the youngest, who is tending the sheep." Samuel said to Jesse, "Send for him. We will not begin the sacrificial banquet until he arrives here." Jesse sent and had the young man brought to them. He was ruddy, a youth, handsome to behold, and making a splendid appearance. The Lord said, "There, anoint him, for this is he." Then Samuel, with the horn of oil in hand, anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David. When Samuel took his leave, he went to Ramah. The Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and he was tormented by an evil spirit sent by the Lord. Notice how this all falls into place here. It seems strange in that verse to hear that the Lord sent this spirit, this evil spirit, to torment Saul. Let's see why, though. So the servants of Saul said to him, "Please, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. If your lordship will order it, we, your servants, here in attendance on you, will look for a man skilled in playing the harp. When the evil spirit from God comes over you, he will play and you will feel better." Saul then told his servants, "Find me a skillful harpist and bring him to me." A servant spoke up to say, "I have observed that one of the sons of Jesse in Bethlehem is a skillful harpist. He is also a stalwart soldier, besides being an able speaker and handsome. Moreover, the Lord is with him." Accordingly, Saul dispatched messengers to ask Jesse to send him his son David, who was with the flock. Then Jesse took 5 loaves of bread, a skein of wine, and a kid, a baby goat, and sent them to Saul by his son David. Thus David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul became very fond of him, made him his armor-bearer, and sent Jesse the message, "Allow David to remain in my service, for he meets with me at my approval." Whenever the spirit from God seized Saul, David would take the harp and play, and Saul would be relieved and feel better, for the evil spirit would leave him. So it seems very out of character, of course, that God would send an evil spirit to torment somebody, but because of that, the servant said, "A harpist will help. He'll bring you peace when you have these tormented feelings." So he sends for a harpist, and it's not yet King David. It's David who had just been anointed, chosen by God, and anointed by Samuel. So he is now under Saul. He is Saul's armor bearer, kind of. I'm not sure if that's quite a right-hand man, but someone who works very closely with him. So it puts him in this position to do what happens next. All right, chapter 17. The heading is the challenge of Goliath. So David and Goliath, you've probably heard this. This is the story of David and Goliath. The Philistines rallied their forces for battle at Soka in Judah and camped between Soka and Azekah at Ephes Damim. Saul and the Israelites also gathered and camped at the Vale of the Terebinth, drawing up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines were stationed on one hill, and the Israelites on the opposite hill with a valley between them. A champion named Goliath, he's described in other texts as being a giant. He is this fighter that no one can beat him. A champion named Goliath of Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 6.5 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a bronze corselet of scale armor weighing 5,000 shekels, and bronze greaves, and had a bronze scimitar slung from a baldric. The shaft of his javelin was like a weaver's heddlebar, and its iron head weighed 600 shekels. His shield-bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why come out in battle formation? I am a Philistine, and you are Saul's servants. Choose one of your men and have him come down to me. If he beats me in combat and kills me, we will be your vassals. But if I beat him and kill him, you shall be our vassals and serve us." The Philistine continued, "I defy the ranks of Israel today. Give me a man and let us fight together." Saul and all the men of Israel, when they heard this challenge of the Philistine, were dismayed and terror-stricken. He's a giant, 6.5 feet tall, especially at that time. It's a big guy. His armor weighs insane amounts. It's so heavy. And he's saying, "Send one man to challenge me." Imagine that kind of fear. Verse 12. David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. He had 8 sons, and in the days of Saul was old and well on in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to war. These 3 sons who had gone off to war were named the firstborn Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. While the 3 oldest had joined Saul, David would go and come from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. He was a shepherd. Meanwhile, the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening for 40 days. So for 40 days, he walks out and stands there waiting, because he'd said, "Send one man to fight me. And if one man can defeat me, we will be your vassals. We will submit to you." And no one has stepped forward. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves for your brothers, and bring them quickly to your brothers in the camp. Also take these 10 cheeses for the field officer. Greet your brothers and bring home some token from them. Saul and they and all Israel are fighting against the Philistines in the Vale of the Terebinth." Early the next morning, having left the flock with a shepherd, David set out on his errand. Set on the errand that Jesse had commanded him, which was take food to his brothers. He reached the barricade of the camp just as the army on their way to the battleground were shouting their battle cry. The Israelites and the Philistines drew up opposite each other in a battle array. David entrusted what he had brought to the keeper of the baggage and hastened to the battle line, where he greeted his brothers. While he was talking with them, the Philistine champion, by the name of Goliath of Gath, came up from the ranks of the Philistines and spoke as before, and David listened. When the Israelites saw the man, they all retreated before him, very much afraid. The Israelites had been saying, "Do you see this man coming up? He comes up to insult Israel. If anyone should kill him, the king would give him a great wealth, and his daughter as well, and would grant exemption to his father's family in Israel." David now said to the men standing by, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and frees Israel of this disgrace? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine in any case, that he should insult the armies of the living God?" They repeated the same words to him and said, "That is how the man who kills him will be rewarded." When Eliab, his oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he grew angry with David and said, "Why did you come down? With whom have you left those sheep in the desert meanwhile? I know your arrogance and your evil intent. You came down to enjoy the battle." David replied, "What have I done now? I was only talking." Yet he turned from him, and another asked him the same question, and everyone gave him the same answer as before. The words that David had spoken were overheard and reported to Saul, who sent for him. Then David spoke to Saul. Let your majesty not lose courage. I am at your service to go and fight this Philistine. But Saul answered David, You cannot go up against this Philistine and fight with him, for you are only a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. Then David told Saul, Your servant used to tend his father's sheep, and whenever a lion or a bear came to carry off a sheep from the flock, I would go after it and attack it and rescue the prey from its mouth. If it attacked me, I would seize it by the jaw, strike it, and kill it. Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be as one of them, because he has insulted the armies of the living God. David continued, The Lord who delivered me from the claws of the lion and the bear will also keep me safe from the clutches of this Philistine. Saul answered David, Go, and the Lord will be with you. Then Saul clothed David in his own tunic, putting a bronze helmet on his head and arming him with a coat of mail. David also girded himself with Saul's sword over the tunic. He walked with difficulty, however, since he had never tried armor before. He said to Saul, I cannot go in these because I have never tried them before. So he took them off. Then, staff in hand, David selected 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in the pocket of his shepherd's bag. With his sling also ready to hand, he approached the Philistine. With his shield bearer marching before him, the Philistine also advanced closer and closer to David. When he had sized David up and seen that he was youthful and ruddy and handsome in appearance, he held him in contempt. The Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come against me with a staff? Then the Philistine cursed David by his gods and said to him, Come here to me, and I will leave your flesh for the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. David answered him, You come against me with sword and spear and scimitar, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel that you have insulted. Today the Lord shall deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will leave your corpse and the corpses of the Philistine army for the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Thus the whole land shall learn that Israel has a God. All this multitude, too, shall learn that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he shall deliver you into our hands. The Philistine then moved to meet David at close quarters, while David ran quickly toward the battle line in the direction of the Philistine. David put his hand into the bag and took out a stone, hurled it with the sling, and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone embedded itself in his brow, and he fell prostrate on the ground. Thus David overcame the Philistine with a sling and stone. He struck the Philistine mortally, and did it without a sword. Then David ran and stood over him with the Philistine's own sword, which he drew from its sheath. He dispatched him and cut off his head. When they saw that their hero was dead, the Philistines took to flight. Then the men of Israel and Judah, with loud shouts, went in pursuit of the Philistines to the approaches of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. And Philistines fell wounded along the road from Sharaim, as far as Gath and Ekron. On their return from the pursuit of the Philistines, the Israelites looted their camp. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he kept Goliath's armor in his own tent. When Saul saw David go out to meet the Philistine, he asked General Abner, whose son is that youth? Abner replied, As truly as your majesty is alive, I have no idea. And the king said, Find out whose son the lad is. So when David returned from slaying the Philistine, Abner took him and presented him to Saul. David was still holding the Philistine's head. Saul then asked him, Whose son are you, young man? David replied, I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem. Chapter 18. By the time David finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan had become as fond of David as fond of David as if his life depended on him. He loved him, and he loved himself, as he loved himself. Saul laid claim to David that day and did not allow him to return to his father's house. And Jonathan entered into a bond with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan divested himself of the mantle he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his military dress and his sword, his bow and his belt. David then carried out successfully every mission on which Saul sent him. So Saul put him in charge of his soldiers, and this was agreeable on the whole army, even to Saul's own officers. At the approach of Saul and David, on David's return after slaying the Philistine, women came out from each of the cities of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing, with tambourines, joyful songs, and sistrums. The women played and sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul was very angry and resentful of the song, for he thought, "They give David 10,000, but only thousands to me. All that remains for him is the kingship." And from that day on, Saul was jealous of David. The next day, an evil spirit from God came over Saul, and he raged in his house. David was in attendance playing the harp as at other times, while Saul was holding his spear. Saul poised the spear, thinking to nail David to the wall, but twice David escaped him. Saul then began to fear David, because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul himself. Accordingly, Saul removed him from his presence by appointing him a field officer. So David led the people on their military expeditions and prospered in all his enterprises, for the Lord was with him. Seeing how successful he was, Saul conceived a fear of David. On the other hand, all Israel and Judah loved him, since he led them on their expeditions. Saul said to David, "There is my older daughter, Merab, whom I will give you in marriage if you become my champion and fight the battles of the Lord." Saul had in mind, "I shall not touch him, but let the Philistines strike him." But David answered Saul, "Who am I, and who are my kin or my father's clan in Israel, that I would become the king's son-in-law?" However, when it was time for Saul's daughter Merab to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel, the Mahathalite, instead. Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and it was reported to Saul, who was pleased at this, for he thought, "I will offer her to him to become a snare for him, so that the Philistines may strike him." Thus, for the second time, Saul said to David, "You shall become my son-in-law today." Saul then ordered his servants to speak to David privately and say, "The king is fond of you, and all his officers love you. You should become the king's son-in-law." But when Saul's servants mentioned this to David, he said, "Do you think it easy to become the king's son-in-law? I am poor and insignificant." When his servants reported to him the nature of David's answer, Saul commanded them to say this to David: "The king desires no other price for the bride than the foreskins of 100 Philistines, that he may thus take vengeance on his enemies." Saul intended in this way to bring about David's death through the Philistines. When the servants reported this offer to David, he was pleased with the prospect of becoming the king's son-in-law. Before the year was up, David made preparations and sallied forth with his men and slew 200 Philistines. He brought back their foreskins and counted them out before the king, that he might thus become the king's son-in-law. So Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. Saul thus came to recognize that the Lord was with David. Besides, his own daughter Michal loved David. Therefore Saul feared David all the more, and was his enemy ever after. The Philistine chiefs continued to make forays, but each time they took the field, David was more successful against them than any other of Saul's officers, and as a result acquired great fame. We'll stop there for this week. But it just goes to show that I've heard this quoted before. It's the Lord doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. If he selects you for something, it doesn't matter if it makes sense or not that you would be able to achieve such a goal. He'll find a way. David was this youth, this, not a child per se, but very young. He was put up against a giant, a 6.5-foot battle-tested warrior, and he defeated him with it's a sling. It's not a slingshot like we think about today. They were much more powerful back then. They were longer, and you can look it up. You could definitely, kill somebody with these slings, but he defeated this warrior as just this youthful boy, a warrior that the other soldiers were too afraid to face because God had chosen him. So it's kind of cool. So yeah, don't really have anything to add to that. Of course, if you have any questions, let me know. We'll talk about it to the best of our abilities. But if not, on that note, we will close as we always do with the Lord's Prayer. Okay. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Amen. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.